think that's where really people geek out a little bit too much there and say, oh, well, the 6 will burn the barrel a lot faster than the 6XC, than the Dasher, than the whatever cartridge. To me, in that point, it really is kind of irrelevant.
Hey there, Marksman Tribe. You're listening to today's guest, Mike Keenan, who is a professional PRS shooter. And that is the topic of today's interview, is getting started in the Precision Rifle series. Now, welcome to the show. This is the Everyday Marksman, the podcast where we talk about tactical skills for living a more adventurous life. Our website is everydaymarksman.co, and there you're going to find all of our social links, our articles, our episodes, and links to our awesome community of marksmen just like you. I am your ever faithful host, Matt Robertson, former military officer turned tech sector corporate grunt, shooting enthusiast, outdoors nerd, and your friend. All right. Now, I am excited for this interview because, if you might not know this, but I have been very interested in getting started with precision rifle shooting for a long time. Now, I've dabbled in it here or there, doing some local matches, even started building out a gun, which is still in the shop at the moment, getting some other work done. But I've never stepped up to doing organized matches like you find with the PRS or the National Rifle League, that's NRL. I've never really dove into that area. And I think part of my hesitation for that was because I didn't know what I didn't know. I also was just afraid I wasn't going to have the right kind of equipment. And to be honest, I think that's why a lot of people don't start. We know that we should go compete. We know where we can go compete, but we don't want to show up and look like fools. So there's a lot of really great information in this interview that dispels a lot of those myths, such as looking like a fool your first time or showing up without the right kind of gear. But Mike does give some great advice for getting started, as well as the two most important things you can do for yourself at your first match. All right, enough out of me. Let's get to the interview. And as always, if you are pressed for time, you can jump to the last 5-10 minutes or so and get my key takeaways from this interview with Mike. All right, let's do it. All right, Mike, welcome to the Everyday Marksman.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I know I've got a bunch of your background here, so prior naval aviation, but I want to start right at the beginning of your competitive shooting career. How long ago was that?
Okay. That was back in 94, 95. Actually, I went to the U.S. Naval Academy and I shot for what we called the combat pistol team, which was basically USPSA back then. Being a collegiate sport, they obviously had a lot of the Olympic style air rifle 22s and whatnot. Was not involved with that, but I actually started shooting competitively back in college.
Okay. So I want to know the story of your very first match. Take me back.
Boy, it's hard to remember, to be honest with you. I know I was happy to have my first pistol was actually I still have it, 1911 Springfield 45, which is what we pretty much all shot back then in USPSA. I don't really remember too much about the specifics of the match. I do remember the first one I did shoot had a small tire shoot house that we had to go through, and that was quite daunting for me, never having shot anything but kind of a flat range type setup in practice. So having to kind of wander through the house, if you will, was quite a challenge and quite an eye opener for me at that time.
Do you remember how you felt that day?
I was excited. We were all finally getting to go out and shoot a match and, rather than just practice at school and whatnot. So I hadn't really done a lot of that growing up or at all. So it was really, really exciting to go out and be a part of something bigger than just the team and the guys I'd been shooting with at the academy.
So you mentioned you didn't do a whole lot of that growing up. So did you have a lot of firearms experience prior to that?
Not really, to be honest with you. We did not own firearms in my house. So I kind of shot with one of my best friends at the time. His dad was an outdoorsman, avid hunter and fisherman and whatnot. And we started doing a lot of archery and shooting. He would take us to a gun club, sportsman's club, really, that actually I became a junior member of. where we learned to shoot rifles. I mean, I shot some rifles, 22s at the Boy Scouts and whatnot, but that's kind of where I really shot some pistol and, trap and skeet, I guess. I'm not sure which one I was shooting at the time. It was a shotgun shooting clays. Being a kid, that's about all I remember. And then shooting archery and whatnot, kind of getting it all into those fundamentals of that kind of, sending something downrange into a target.
So back to your first match then, how did that go?
Mm-hmm. I don't think it went too well. I'll really be honest with you. I don't remember a lot from that match in particular about how I finished, or I mean, certainly didn't set any records on fire by any stretch of the imagination. I know I didn't shoot myself or anybody else, so that was probably a win.
It didn't get DQ, didn't kill anybody. Call it good.
Exactly. That was pretty much it. I be honest with you, even at the time, because of the way we called it, we just kind of went and didn't even realize until later that we were actually that I was really shooting a USPSA sanctioned match, if that makes any sense, because of the way the team was set up. It wasn't like, it's probably not as active. USPSA back then, I don't think was quite as big as it is right now, and it is involved with a lot of the stuff. I know we have a lot of collegiate teams that shoot different matches, and different types of shooting sports between 3-gun and pistol matches and even PRS matches.
So I'm curious about the evolution then from that first USPSA pistol match with a Springfield 1911, which is, I own one as well, Springfield.
Yep.
Though I don't think I ever shoot it anymore. I should fix that. But I want to know. I want to go the evolution from. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a gun hipster now, so I got a CZ. That's been my go-to.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
So I want to know your evolution from that USPSA match with a 1911 to PRS.
Yeah, so I shot some, and then of course once I got out of school, ammo started becoming a lot more expensive. So here I was going from shooting all kinds of free government ammo, which was great, to now I'm a poor, right out of college ensign, not having a lot of money, and frankly, needing to concentrate more on going through flight school, a lot more important than go out and shoot matches all the time. So I'd taken a little bit of a break. I shot here and there, but didn't really do too much right out of school. Several years later, once I kind of got a little bit further on in my career, got back into pistol shooting again with that same 1911. And then went past that, ended up getting some Glocks, and actually now I have a Kai Custom 2011 that I shoot for limited. So I actually got back into shooting USPSA, and then a lot of 3-gun stuff as well, 2-gun and 3-gun over the last 7 or 8 years, maybe a little longer ago than that. And then from there, kind of progressed on to PRS. I've always kind of liked the long range shooting. Just something intrigued me about hitting targets at really long range. And I'm sure being a hunter and whatnot, my original concept of really long range was probably, like a lot of guys, 300 to 500 yards, and 1,000 was nothing that I would do consistently and do well. And eventually I just figured I'd buy a rifle and find ranges that I could shoot. And
so how long have you been doing the PRS piece since then?
It's only been about 3 years. This was my 3rd full season shooting. I had one season when I shot a couple of 2 matches 4 seasons ago, and then really started hitting heavy about 2.5 years ago.
Okay. Now this probably is a politics question, but for those who don't know, and I'm fuzzy on this, what is there a distinction between PRS and NRL, or is it just kind of 2 flavors?
Yeah, it's kind of it's basically the 2 sanctioning bodies of competitive long range shooting, at least where it's gone. The PRS Precision Rifle Series and then the National Rifle League are owned by 2 different people. Travis and then Shannon Kay owns the PRS, and very, very similar. They've I don't know how to say they differentiated between the 2. Really, the PRS is starting to become a little more nationwide. It was split up a little more, where the NRL was mostly West Coast and the PRS was mostly East Coast. But really, the PRS is really starting to not take over, that's not the right word, spread a little bit further into the West Coast and have a lot more national matches all over the country. And the NRL is still a little bit more concentrated in the West than they are in the East Coast.
So I probably should ask this earlier. You mentioned you have a Kai Custom pistol. Well, what kind of, what's your rifle?
My rifle right now, I'm running a impact action with a custom benchmark barrel in 6-dasher on an MPA chassis.
Okay. Which chassis? You say MPA or is that
Yeah, Masterpiece Arms.
Okay, Masterpiece Arms. Okay.
Their new Matrix chassis. Yeah, Phil's a great guy.
So you said your rifle right now. So how often as a professional shooter do you actually switch rifles?
Yeah, it's more not that it's so much switching rifles. I mean, it depends on what you really consider the rifle, to be honest with you. Like, for example, I think I shot, and I didn't shoot as much as some guys do. I think I shot through probably 5+ barrels last year. You know, if you consider a new chamber a new rifle, then guys are shooting new rifles every couple of months. You know, if you're shooting a lot, you might burn out a barrel in a month. I know a couple of guys that have done that, shooting matches and training every weekend. They end up shooting quite a bit. Mm-hmm. If you're considering actions and chassis, a lot of that stuff kind of gets swapped around. Like take the same barreled action, drop it into a different chassis or different stock if something, you know, hits my fancy or something new came out. Like the end of last year, the new MPA Matrix chassis came out, and I was fortunate enough to get one of the first ones 2 matches before the finale, and so I was able to shoot it in the finale. So that was kind of a new rifle. Like if you were to look at the rifle, it would certainly look different because the chassis or stock certainly brings out kind of what the rifle is, but frankly, everything else on the part of the rifle, the stuff that actually shoots and kind of the bullet goes down the barrel is all the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So something you mentioned there, I wanted to call back attention to is you said you shot through 5 barrels last year. Now, I might be wrong. A 6-dasher is kind of known for being a relative barrel burner, right?
No, actually, the dasher and the 6mm is probably one of the easier ones. Some of the Creedmoors tend to burn out the barrels a little faster. It has to do with speed. Mm-hmm. Dasher for me was something I started shooting about the end of last season. So I should have mentioned before, I shoot for Alpha Munitions brass company. And they came out with their dasher at the end of, we've been testing it for quite a while, but they finally had enough and announced that in the fall of last year. So that's about when I started shooting it at matches. It had been shot at matches since about last spring, but before that I was shooting a caliber called 6XC.
So I want to kind of ask the question on, so 5 barrels, but how many rounds was that?
Each barrel's probably somewhere around 12 to 1,300 rounds. I think I shot 7,000 or 8,000 rounds last year of just precision rifle ammo. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then you have dry fires, right? And then everything else goes into it. And the reason I asked that question is, you know, one of the points I try to make to people is a lot of people, I think, emphasize too much on picking just the right caliber or picking just the right this or that when they're not going to shoot more than like 500 rounds in a year. And the real difference happens when you are burning 5 barrels and 6,000 rounds in a year.
Yeah, I think people actually make too much on whether it's a barrel burner or not, to be honest with you. In the scheme of things, when you're shooting, especially if you're going to go and shoot competition, barrels are very inexpensive. There's not much else on the gun. You figure a barrel blank somewhere in the $320 to $350 retail range, a few $100s to have it chambered up. In the scheme of things, it sounds like a lot of money, but it really isn't a lot of money when you figure the average cost of a 2-day PRS match is going to be somewhere around $7,000 to $1,000 to go for the weekend. When you factor in travel time, the cost of a hotel, gas, food, bullets, entry fee, all of those things. So when you start spreading that out, getting a couple hundred rounds more out of a barrel or less out of a barrel is really kind of irrelevant. I think that's where really people geek out a little bit too much there and say, oh, well, the 6 will burn the barrel out faster than the 6XC, than the dasher, than the whatever cartridge. To me, in that point, it really is kind of irrelevant. And again, and then if you're not shooting that much, it doesn't really matter on the other end, like kind of like what you're saying. If you're only shooting 500 rounds a year, getting an extra 100 or 200 rounds out of your barrel isn't really a big deal either.
Mm-hmm. Over all this career you've done between the pistol shooting and 2-gun and 3-gun, shotgun, clays, and PRS, if you could narrow it down, what are the top 5 lessons you've learned from shooting competitively?
Teamwork in some regard. Teamwork is one of the things I really like about PRS is that we all kind of work together. Everybody wants to win but they want to win because they beat you, not because you beat yourself or you had a problem. Everybody's very willing to help you out when that goes on. So it's kind of that teamwork as far as, I don't know, I kind of call it like we're all one team. I feel like we're all one big family out there when we're shooting, even though we're competing against each other. Discipline, certainly for keeping your head in the game, just with the PRS stuff, just loading, getting there, time management. I'm having a hard time coming up with a couple other ones for you there. Sorry about that. Those are my top three anyway.
So you had so the top three, then you have teamwork, discipline, and then what was the
I guess it's not really probably teamwork. I should probably say sportsmanship. That's probably a better way to describe it rather than teamwork, more to the sportsmanship of it. And that's honestly what brought me more to PRS more than anything. Out of all the disciplines I've shot, not that I haven't experienced that in other ones, but the sportsmanship in PRS is unbelievable compared to any of the other shooting sports I've ever shot in. So
for someone who's brand new and shows up, how is that sportsmanship piece going to look to them? Like if they don't have all the gear, is that going to be a problem?
That's exactly what it's going to look like. And that's exactly why it is. You could show up there. Probably there's actually some places, if you somehow had a problem with your rifle, people have donated rifle ammo, optics, all kinds of stuff that if your rifle went down or you had a problem, where there's rifles for you there to shoot. So you obviously you just can't show up with nothing, right? I mean, we're not there to put you through it, but I mean, if you have a problem, if you have gear that's not working right or whatever, they'll get you through. There isn't a piece of gear that I own that another competitor couldn't use. And not only a new competitor to try something out before they purchased it or not know or didn't realize it was there, but frankly, my competition. So if I'm happen to be shooting well and I'm going for the win, and the guy who's tied with me or heading right there is like, hey, Mike, can I use this, on this stage? Absolutely. The answer is yes. And I've never, ever had a problem on the flip side of that of like, I need another bag because the stage requires this. Can I borrow your bag? I've never had anybody say, I'm not really comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned bags. I'm going to have to dig into that one a little bit because I feel like watching from the side, because I have not done a PRS match. I'm trying to gear myself into doing it. I'm learning as much as I can. So I'm considering you free consulting. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. It's part of the sportsmanship.
Yeah. So I see these like different styles of bags versus tripods. Like I feel like before I started looking into this, my idea of this was, show up with a nice bipod and then go for it. And I feel like that's not actually how things happen anymore. So let's talk about some of that ancillary equipment before I know gear conversations are what they are, but
yeah, I think the biggest piece of gear, if you have to buy one piece of gear, it would be a wax canvas game changer from Armageddon Gear. I could shoot just about every single stage with that piece of gear and be successful. Now, there is some stuff when every once in a while you get in one or two stages that are a little weirdly designed or whatever, that another little piece of gear happens to help out a little bit. But that's what I use for a rear bag. It's pretty much the only bag I use. I do have a little sandbag that Tom made for me that works really well because I'm about 5'8", so sometimes getting on the PR skill stage, I need just a little bit thinner than what the game changer is. But most of the guys out there are running a game changer for 90% of the match. So, and there's some variations on that. Like Weebad makes a bag that's out there. Some other companies make some bags that obviously they can't copy because it is patented, I think. But do a similar thing. So if somebody else, shoots for another company or does something like that, or happens to, really like that one, there's bags that do similar work. But usually we all have a bag that is very similar to the game changer, if not the game changer. And that will get you through most of the stuff, either shooting with it on its side, kind of upside down, you use all sides of it. There's not one way to shoot it. And then we also use it for a rear bag too.
Mm-hmm. So can you describe the game changer? Like, what does it actually look like so people can kind of get a sense of why it matters so much?
It looks like I'm trying to think. It kind of looks like an N, if you will, like a big flat N or upside down V, or however you want to look at it. So think of a big square bag where the bottom of it has a V cut in it. And what that V does now the flat does have a little bit of a bump in it too. but kind of when you get it the fill in the right way, it's kind of squishy and moves around a little bit. But what that V does is when you go up to anything that's kind of thin, like a 2x4 that's on edge, or a gate or something like that, is it kind of the weight of the bag clamps over it and helps you give this kind of more flat surface. And that's what the game changing part of it is, rather than just a square bag filled with sand or anything else that we used to use, and you just kind of throw it on something that's big and flat. Now the bag works perfectly well for those type of situations. So if you're on a big rock, or you're on a table or something like that, where you're not using a bipod, you can put that down and then lay it on there. One of the keys to that bag, though, actually is taking a little bit of the fill out and getting it a little more squishy, so that the kind of bag wraps around the gun and gives you a little bit more purchase and a little bit better recoil control.
Okay, cool. I'll definitely be leaving a link to that in our show notes on this episode. So I want to come back to the lessons learned. So you mentioned sportsmanship and discipline. I might have missed the third one.
Time management.
Oh, okay. So put that under disciplines. Time management, it's its own. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a discipline kind of. I guess I looked at it as discipline throughout the whole thing, and that's another thing I really liked about PRS over some of the other sports. I felt as much as dry firing and doing some of that stuff with a pistol or a rifle at the house, kind of. I know a lot of guys do that, and you have to do that. But for some reason, I don't feel that connected with it. I know that sounds silly, that I don't feel that connected with it. Just because the recoil difference. I mean, you can get a pistol pointed at, the light switch or the plug or whatever you're going to do there. But a lot of it has to do, when you're shooting the pistol, about managing that recoil to get that follow-on shot quickly, right? And in PRS, you can dry fire and do that stuff. And really, it's about when that rifle goes click, when you're dry firing, is everything lined up the way they are? And the way these rifles are so accurate, and pretty much everybody from the top to the bottom is showing up with unbelievably good rifles and super accurate, that when you're dry firing at the house, it's almost identical to how it's going to work in the real world. If you're pulling the trigger where you need to pull the trigger, you're going to make an impact. Now, where that trigger is getting pulled, the biggest question there is going to be a wind call. But elevation-wise, most of the time, it's not too bad. And then, are you steady on the barricade? Are you pulling that trigger where you need to do? And the other thing I like staying with the discipline side of it is having the discipline to get your ammunition squared away. I mean, it's a lot of reloading and time and whatnot to do that, to make sure you have ammunition and the gun's clean and everything's set up for it. Time discipline comes to the time discipline in the particular stage itself. Can you focus on the stage with everything going on and see all the little things that are happening in do it in the given time frame? Most of these stages would not be that challenging if I gave you 10, 15, 20 minutes, unlimited amount of time. Where they become challenging is seeing all of the things that you need to see, all the subtle wind changes, all the subtle, did you see where that puff of smoke was on a impact to know to make an adjustment a little bit left or a little bit right as you're kind of bringing the gun back into recoil, chambering another round, moving to another position, setting up, can you do all that in the time required? And that's kind of the time discipline of the focus required to shoot well at PRS.
Okay. That was a really good answer. So I want to kind of talk about getting ready as a newbie, for someone who's never shot a match before, what's the first thing you would want them to know?
Well, what I want them to know, and this is the biggest mistake that I see new shooters showing up with, is that they do not have two things done to their rifle. I cannot help you. Nobody can help you out there if you do not have a good zero and you do not have good data for your rifle. So you need to spend a good amount of time ensuring that, within a half inch isn't good enough, for a zero. It's got to be like dead zero, within a tenth of a mil. So it's kind of funny. Everybody talks about mils, little sidebar here, mils and MOA. Either one is fine, right? It's angular measurement. It's like saying, well, which measurement is more accurate, inches or millimeters? It's just kind of irrelevant, right? And when we go down to decimal places, it's all the same thing. In PRS, the language of choice is mils. So mostly if I start talking about stuff like that, that's kind of why most of us think in mils, like a tenth or, 2/10 right, or 2/10 up, or whatever it's going to be, is all talking about mils. So if you're not really within about a tenth of a mil of your point of impact, point of aim, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure at distance, especially with wind calls and whatnot. And then again, newer shooters are showing up with, and I've seen it, like, well, the side of the box in the 6 Creedmoor says that the bullet's going, 27, 25, and the BC on the bullet is this, and I put that into my, free phone app, which are great. And I'm not making hits, and I'm not really sure where my zero is. It could be a half-inch low. Sorry, buddy, I can't help you. I don't know where your bullet's going at 842 yards and 12-mile-an-hour wind. I can't help you. So if I could tell anybody out there that's listening is, we can help on the fundamentals. I can help you get the rifle balanced the right way on a one-day match. I can say, hey, how about this? How about try this? But if your data is not good, going to make impacts. You can have the perfect form, but you just, the bullet's not going where you want it to go because nothing's dialed in right.
So when we talk about collecting data, I mean, from the way you mentioned, the box says velocity. So I'm assuming, we need to have actual chrono numbers.
You do. And again, those are the biggest things too, that all that stuff is just a place to start. Mm-hmm. So you look at what would be considered good data for bullets. So let's say you got a burger bullet and you're looking up like the Bible, Litz's custom curve, or Litz's trued out BC. Well, that BC is only good for the twist rate, the velocity, all of that stuff, the atmospherics, because that'll velocity decay and all that kind of stuff for when that bullet was tested. Your bullet in your rifle is going to not be the same thing. It's going to be close, but it's not going to be exact. So what I do when I set up new ammunition or a new rifle or testing it out is, yes, I collect all that data. I have a lab radar and a magneto speed, for different situations, and I will shoot over those things. I will get my average velocity over a number of rounds. I will start out with a BC that I think is close, and then I will start shooting at range. Usually I start around, I might make a shot or two at like 400 yards, and I go out and I make a horizontal line on all my targets because I'm not worried about left and right. I'm only worried about up and down in elevation. And I will go out and I will true my ballistics calculator. So I run a Kestrel with applied ballistics on it. So at 400 yards, my Kestrel says, okay, you need 1.6 mils. I dial at 1.6 mils in my scope, boom, center punch. 500 yards, 2.5 mils, center punch. Go to 600 yards, okay, it's a little high. So then I start making corrections. I either start pulling speed or velocity out of my Kestrel so that what I'm seeing on the target is actually what I'm seeing on my Kestrel. Or normally what I would do is I would make an adjustment on my scope. So if it said, 6.3 mils at whatever, and it was actually 6.4, I was hitting low or hitting high, I would make an adjustment. And then, okay, it's actually, 6.4 mils for 600 or whatever. And that would be 1,000 yards. But, whatever the number would be, I'd write it down and then I'd kind of make some calculations. And one of the basic things we kind of do is from about 0 to 500-ish yards, speed tends to be a little bit more important than BC. And then from 500 or 600 to 1,000, BC tends to be a little bit more important than speed. So if I'm out further, if I make a smaller adjustment with BC, it'll move more versus making speed in closer. Like you have to make a large adjustment at 400 yards with BC to make any effect going up and down versus a smaller adjustment with velocity. And then, of course, you may need to add in a little bit of velocity as you come back to make sure that you're still lining up. You trued it out to 1,000 and needed to add a couple tenths. Now you need to, so you change the BC a little bit, and then you might need to bring that back, add a little bit more velocity in closer. And again, that velocity is not going to make as big a deal out at range as it will in close.
Yeah. So you're saying all this is like, you can have the numbers, you can guess, but it's just a guess. You actually have to go shoot the gun.
And it's your gun. You have to shoot your rifle because, again, twist rates, everybody talks about, like, I got this barrel, it's got this twist rate. All those things will affect BC. If your bullet's coming out a little bit faster than my bullet, even though we're shooting the same bullet and the same twist rate, your BC, because it's an average calculation, because your BC is actually changing as it goes down range, right? The BC I know guys that actually will set up like 2 or 3 different profiles in their ballistics calculator, like a 0 to 400, a 400 to 700, and a 700 to whatever. Or I'm just throwing numbers out there, but something like that. As your velocity is decaying, so is your BC. So there's multiple ways to attack that problem. But you have to know what it is. If I tell you the target is 842 yards, I've given you like you've talked about some snipers and stuff before. I mean, one of the hard things in a lot of those situations is to get an accurate range. Where in PRS, we're fortunate enough for the most part to get an accurate range. There's no sense to not taking advantage of that. If you don't have that perfect elevation dialed in, like you're just so behind the curve, it's going to be painful.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think a lot of people, they kind of have this, I'll include myself in here, but like a romanticism about, I'm going to mill the target and estimate the range. But the margin of error on that is so high.
It's so high. I love getting in arguments online with hunters, and usually it's a question of like first focal plane versus second focal plane and why one's better than the other. And they insist that they have to have a first focal plane. Now I'm a big proponent of first focal plane, but I'm also a big proponent of the best glass available. So yeah, you're right. You're not going to mill a target on an unknown distance with an unknown, it'd be one thing if I could say, well, this is specifically this height, then you might be able to get close. But when you're talking about humans or animals or any of that stuff, like, okay, is that 36 inches or is it 37? I mean, look at the, the height difference between, me and my wife and, my son who's extremely tall, all that, none of us are going to mill out the same if we're standing next to each other, right? Like, well, which one's the 36 inches?
Right. And then that margin of error comes out. Like if you're out at 800, 1200 yards, then it's that margin of error is a total miss.
Yeah. It's a total miss.
So to get around that, you're suggesting everybody should basically have a laser rangefinder.
Well, in a PRS match, now some guys are advocates of that, depending on where you're at. Most of the ranges that I shoot at, we've been pretty fortunate where the ranges have been pretty accurate. And that does tend to be kind of a bone of contention, because if you're going to tell me what the range is, then it needs to be accurate. Otherwise, you're going to say, hey, it's not an accurate range. And then it becomes not fair. So most of the ranges, now I have shot a couple of matches out west where the ranges have not been quite as accurate, and those guys tended to carry more of the laser rangefinders and have pretty good ones and used them. Most of the time, I don't think I used one in a match last year at all.
So actually, I didn't know this. So I always assumed that this was unknown distance. So you're saying that they actually tell you how far it is?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They got away from that in most of the PRS stuff a long time ago, because what ends up happening is, unless you're going to segregate people like pre and post shot, which again, the way a lot of the matches are run, everybody's sitting right next to each other. You know what I mean? It's you can't have you'd be there for three or 4 days if you had to have, miles in between stages and doing stuff. That's kind of the way like Mammoth Sniper Challenge is set up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so all the stuff, they'll hand you the range book, Friday afternoon, and all the ranges are in there for the entire match.
Okay. Well, that's really good information to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, like I'm shooting a match this weekend. The course of fire is already out. they posted up online like a week before, as you can look at like kind of what you're going to do and what ranges you'll have to shoot.
Okay. All right. So I want to keep going this conversation now with like,
sure,
we're getting ready for a newbie. So you said the first two things, you need to know your zero and you need to know your data. No way around that.
Absolutely.
You have to know it.
Nope.
Okay. So I want to break this to a couple of categories of rifle, caliber, optics, and any extra supporting gear that we want to go. So I want to start with rifle. We kind of already had a little bit of this conversation here, but if I'm a newbie, so let's I can't afford to go get, a nice custom built precision rifle. Where do you think people should really start? And this probably ties together with caliber too, or the cartridge.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is not a poor man's sport. There is no $400 Glock, let's go shoot production class like USPSA entry into this. You can show up with a lot of different rifles. I'm assuming your question, you want to have something that's reasonably competitive. I mean, I heard of some guy actually just reading about shows up to a match with a Ruger number 1, single shot Ruger number 1. I mean, you can show up with anything, but I'm assuming you're talking about somebody that wants to not be competitive like they're going to win, but like not show up with a Ruger number 1 or a 30-30, iron sight rifle. I mean, something that's like, something that's within like what should be shot.
Yeah. So they want to show up and have fun.
Right, exactly, and actually hit targets. Right, you want to show up and you want to shoot better than 5% of the targets out there. You're going to need to get into something at a minimum like the Ruger RPR or actually, I'm a huge fan of the Tikkas. I've got a Tikka CTR that I use for a little hunting gun. That gun is a hammer. That's probably one of the better guns to get into, and they're going to all be. I think what's a Ruger RPR? What are they? They're like 12 or 1500 bucks or something, right? Around there. So, and that's, I think, where that CTR, the TAC 1 is. And I think there's a whole bunch of it. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know all of them, like the Begaras and the, what's the other brand that everybody shoots that has the lock barrel?
Savage?
Savage. So there's a bunch of those rifles that will, be reasonable. Like you're not gonna be blazing it away. You are going to be at that point somewhat limited by the accuracy of the rifle and the system, how it works overall. So you're going to be behind the power curve on that. Now, if you can step up a little bit more, there is a pile of manufacturers right now that are making fantastic rifles in about that like 2 to 2,500 range. I know Masterpiece Arms, because that was where the production class was. They just bumped it up to $2,500, but it wasn't $2,000 for the rifle. So like Bad Rock Rifles has theirs. I think PVA, which is Patriot Valley Arms, had their Minuteman rifle. I don't know what the status of that is, if they're still making them or what the deal is. MPA had their production class rifle, and those are fantastic values for the money. I mean, that is every bit. I mean, the MPA in particular, I mean, it's their cost. They do it because they do so much in house. They make their barrels. They bought Spencer barrels back in the day. It's an interesting story how he actually got into PRS. I'll let you talk to him to get that whole story. Maybe that's another whole conversation. But fantastic story in how they got into precision rifles and what they do. And so they're able to offer, and they run on a Curtis action that Curtis makes for MPA, where they're able to kind of. I think it's just a little bit less milling. It's certainly not any less quality, but as you well know, when you get CNC machines, machine time is price, right? If I can get an extra part in a day, it's just that, that machine, the longer it takes you to get a part out of the machine, the more it costs. That's the bottom line on CNC machines. So they're able to, I think they, kind of do a little bit less milling or something. So they're able to get these rifles for fantastic value. And frankly, that rifle's probably every bit as accurate as my, full custom build, is the way that goes. So that really, if you can pony up and get there, again, this is unfortunately just not a poor man's sport on the rifle. That really gets you into, you're not limited anymore.
So just kind of pulling on this thread some more. So you mentioned Tikkas, and the Ruger RPR. And kind of that price range, like the way, so my personal rifle that I've been kind of building up it's built around a Howa action. Bedded in a Manners stock.
Nice.
So I'm like, is that for like a beginner like that? Okay, that would probably work, assuming it shoots well. I mean, every rifle is different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's enough to go have fun.
Absolutely.
Which is the goal.
Absolutely. I mean, the actions are going to be there. I'm not as familiar with the Howa action. What barrel are you going with on it? Like, how is the barrel set up?
Yeah, right now it's
a barreled action.
Yeah, so I bought it as a complete rifle. It's just it's a heavy barrel 308, 20 inch.
I got you.
I'll eventually replace that, but so it's just kind of a standard. So the Howa actions are modeled off the old Seiko, so flat bottom, so really nice bedding.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, something like that would absolutely get you in. Now, again, like out of the factory where you're going to be limited. So, for example, like what you're talking about, and just to understand the left and right lateral limits, if you will. So you talked about a 20-inch 308. So ideally, you would be running something like if you were going to really run a 308 in PRS, you'd want to shoot something at around a 28-inch, right, to get the extra velocity that you would need in a 308 caliber. So that's kind of like, unfortunately, that's the same thing with my Tikka. My Tikka CTR is a 20-inch factory barrel, and it hammers, but because 200 feet per second slower than I would be with a full length barrel, when I start pushing that thing out past 850, 900 yards, it becomes a little bit of a challenge, right? I mean, I will wear somebody out at 500 yards. You want to shoot 500 yards? That rifle is unbelievable. You know what I mean? Because it's right in its wheelhouse of where it's going. But when I start stretching it out, that's where I start having a little bit, the dispersion of the bullets start getting a little bit further apart. But the reality is, we all like to think that we're going to go out and half of this match is going to be at 1,200 yards. The reality is you could probably miss at most matches everything over 1,000 yards and win the match. Because the reality is there's only a couple of targets that are out that far. Now, granted, you're going to hit everything else, but I mean, it's not like you're going to have 50% of your targets at 950 and 1,000 yards. Even facilities that have that kind of distance don't have that kind of distance for every stage.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good, also a good bit of information there. So I probably need to pull on the caliber question, the cartridge question anymore. Kind of mentioned the 308. It's the old the old war horse. The way I've always looked at it is, if you're like me and that's what you bought, shoot it until it burns out. You'll learn more by doing that than rushing out to buy the latest, greatest in the caliber wars. But then what? So like, what trade-offs do you think are out there from like the next step?
The next step is you've got really one of two choices. The first decision you need to make is, are you going to reload? Or are you, crazy rich? If you're crazy rich, you can get somebody else to reload. There's plenty of companies out there like Copper Creek that load hand load quality ammunition. Clay's cartridge is another one, in all of the kind of what I would call oddball calibers, right? Like anything you want, 6.5, 47, 6 Creedmoor. I mean, all the normal stuff too, Dasher, XC, anything out there that you want, they're loading ammunition for. But those start coming in at a price point that, is going to be a challenge. Well, I shouldn't say a challenge for a new shooter. New shooter is not there. It depends on what your economic status is. If you're a, rich doctor and your time is better valued spent, picking up an extra shift in the ER, maybe ordering ammunition's the way to go. I got a friend that's like that. He's a doctor and it isn't worth his time to reload. I mean, it frankly isn't. The hours he spends reloading, he could make more money than it would cost him to buy ammunition. So he buys ammunition, which makes truly smart, financial sense. But for the rest of us who don't make that kind of money, you need to then decide, are you going to reload or are you not? If you're not going to reload, then you need to stick with something that really good factory match grade ammunition is available for. And frankly, those are two cartridges in my mind. That's either 6.5 Creedmoor and probably more realistically 6 Creedmoor. There's really not much else out there in factory ammunition that you can get on any of the major websites and order, a case of ammunition that's not, $5 a round or $4 a round, like I said, some of the more specialty places. So that's really the first question you need to ask yourself. It's not like which one of these is better or worse than the others. All of those cartridges and let's face it, PRS and most of those ones have pretty much gone to the 6mm. They, it has to mainly do with the recoil management, and that's not recoil like, oh, my shoulder hurts recoil. It's recoil in shooting off of these crazy rickety barricades and seeing where that bullet went, whether it's an impact or it's a miss. An impact and where it went on the plate versus where I'm aiming is just as important to know, to seeing a miss, to be able to adjust for your next shot, whether you made a proper wind call or not, or seeing if the wind picking up or, as you're continuing on with the stage. So first and foremost, you need to ask yourself, are you going to reload or not? If you're not, you now have limited yourself to a couple of cartridges in my mind. And on those, I would probably go with the 6 Creedmoor again, just because that's, the 6mm is just kind of where it's at in PRS. If you are going to reload, now kind of the sky's the limit, and really it's dealer's choice. There's a pile of great cartridges out there, and frankly, I'm fortunate enough to be involved with one of the companies that has pioneered two of the probably best 6mm cartridges that everybody been waiting for, having brass now. One of the downsides to shooting the Dasher has always been fire forming, and it's a more tricky fire form than a standard, improved cartridge with the 40-degree shoulder. It's just kind of a lot of that metal is really going forward. So guys kind of really shied away from it. Well, now you don't have to. Now there's factory brass available for the Dasher. There's factory GT brass from both Alpha and Hornady. There's GT, there's 6XE, there's 6 Creedmoor. If you really like necking stuff down, there's 6x47. There's so many cartridges out there, and then you get to decide just kind of what you want. That's kind of like buying cars, you like red or you like blue. It's some of it's dealer choice. I think like you said, some people really put a lot more. Most of those cartridges in the hands of somebody who knows how to shoot, or more importantly, in the gunsmith that knows how to build a rifle, is going to be plenty accurate. Every single one of those cartridges is currently being shot, and people are winning with, including 6 Creedmoor. I mean, we had a discussion on that on one of the boards the other day, like, oh, nobody's shooting 6 Creedmoor. I'm like, oh, I ever hear a guy named, Dave Preston or Steve MC? I mean, he just won the North Carolina match. It was just won last weekend with a 6 Creedmoor. So,
and then just out of kind of curiosity in this one, because you said everybody's going to 6mm class because of recoil reasons. But there is a division of PRS, right, that still is only 308 or 223, right? The tactical division.
That's correct. There is still TAC division in PRS. Exactly. I wish I could spout out all of the rules. I believe they kind of changed it a little bit from the way it was several years ago. Now there's a bullet weight limitation and speed limitation that's different from the standard 3,200 feet per second for everybody else in open division.
Okay.
I think it's somewhere around 28 or 2,900 feet per second. It's basically because guys were ended up like really hot rodding, 155 grain bullets going smoking fast. And the kind of idea of TAC was to allow police and military to be able to use kind of duty ammunition, duty rifles, kind of like what you're bringing along, a 20-inch type barrel, and you're a little bit behind. But if I put you up against, somebody shooting a 155 at 3150, and you're shooting, 75 grain factory duty ammo at 2550, you're at a huge disadvantage. And that's not what the idea of that class was. So they did bring it down. Okay. To kind of bring it back in. So I think you can only shoot 77 or some green bullets in 223 and like 178s in below in 308.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll move on to optics then. You kind of mentioned this a couple of times here. So I know the general advice when you look around forums is that really the glass should be more expensive than the rifle it's sitting on. And earlier in the conversation, you mentioned you advocate the best glass you can buy. So right off the bat, I'm going to ask the question: if I have limited amount of money to spend, where should I put that?
Like specific brands, or are you talking about like optics or rifle?
Yeah, no. So it would be, should I put that money more towards like good glass or towards the rifle itself?
Unfortunately, you can't have one without the other. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so you buy the most expensive scope out there, you get a Tangent Theta and put it on a Walmart 700 rifle. This is kind of irrelevant, right? There's no real compromise. That's kind of why the old adage of spend as much on your rifle as you do in your gun, or your rifle and scope, comes into play. So you can't, if you got $5,000 to spend, you can't spend $4,500 on a scope and $500 in glass. You couldn't do the reverse, right? You got to kind of do $2,500 in each, gives you kind of the best bang for the buck. Okay, and that's probably fairly true. I mean, you got to kind of look at your budget, and again, and I hate to say it, guys out there, it's just not a cheap sport, and that stuff matters. Glass matters. I mean, I've stepped up into some, been fortunate enough to step up into some pretty nice glass, and the ability to see. Now, it's not worth a lot. The difference between any of these top tier scopes, anything from the Vortexes, Bushnell, Night Force to Schmidt and Bender and Tangent Theta, is maybe worth one. Whatever anybody would consider the lowest end on that scale to the highest end on that scale is probably worth maybe 1 to 2 points in an entire match. Mm-hmm. But when you start doing that, and then you're like, okay, well, how do you weigh your powder and how good is your ammunition? Is that worth a point? Is the way you rifle and how it's done, is that worth a point? That's how you pick up a point here, a point there, a point here and there. And when these matches are settled between the top 10 places, covered by 7 points, that 1 or 2 points matter.
Mm-hmm. So I think a better way to look at this is that there is there is definitely a point of diminishing returns on just about everything. But in terms of optics, then there's a tipping point where, hey, this is good enough that you should be focusing your efforts elsewhere. So does that sound fair?
Yeah, that's probably pretty accurate in there. And in that case, of course, the minimums you need to have is something that you can dial, something that's got some sort of reticle in it that has the ability to, measure, so you can hold over. In other words, not just a, crosshair reticle, and it doesn't necessarily have to have a tree in it or not. I don't, some of mine have trees and some of them don't. But it also has to be mechanically sound. So that's one of the big things too, is, when you dial it to 6 mils and then you dial it back to 0 and you dial it back to 6 mils, does the bullet impact the same place each time you do that? Repeatability is huge.
So there's a couple of things you mentioned that I want to spend a little more time on. And so number one, earlier you mentioned first focal plane, second focal plane. I feel like everybody is hands down will say first focal plane. And I've been saying it for years too.
Yep.
But if you're not milling targets,
game, yes.
So in this game, definitely.
Yes.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, so when you're talking about milling targets, and that's where people mess this up. Milling targets, why would you ever mill a target not at max magnification? So I'm going to mill a target. Like we were talking about the inaccuracies before. Why would I ever mill a target at 1,000 yards-ish at 16 power when I have a 25 power scope? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. And if it's at a point where I don't need to do that, it's at 200 or 300 yards. I don't need to mill it. I can just pull the trigger because the drop on it's a little. So if you're in a position where you need to mill the target, like in a hunting situation or some of these other ones, there's no reason to ever do that at anything less than maximum power. Because you need to be able to see the definition between the two, right? Is it 0.2 mils? Is it like 0.25 mils or 0.22 mils, or, you know what I mean? Where exactly is that? And as that in a first focal plane or anything in the middle, like it's just smaller and smaller. So there's no reason to do that in our game now. So that's aside, because we don't really do that now in PRS. The first focal plane comes in because most of the time we're not shooting at max magnification. Like for me personally, I shoot somewhere around the 16 to 17 power for the entire match, from 400 yard targets, frankly, out to 1,000, 1,200 yard targets. Sometimes I might bump the power up a little bit if I'm going out that far, but that gives me enough field of view that I can see everything that I need to see going around the target, like little things I want to pick up, okay, to the wind, mirage, some of the stuff underneath the target. But it also gives me enough definition in the reticle itself to be able to make proper wind holds. So am I holding 2 or 3/10 or 1.2 mils? Like in my reticle, it has a mil mark at every 0.2 reticles. There's a tick, and I prefer that over the half mil, half mil marks. It's just a little bit better when you start shooting targets that are. We shoot a lot of targets that are 0.3, 0.4 mils wide. Having a mil mark to be able to hold a 0.2 or 0.3 is important, rather than, okay, where's 0.3 if I got a half a mil mark? It's kind of here. It's not as accurate as it needs to be.
Okay. I'm going to sidetrack off of the first focal plane piece of that. So it kind of gives me a follow-up question on that one. And is you said you pretty much shoot around 16, 17 power most of the time. So is that kind of like the ideal range most people are going to use? Like, where is the point of like, you're just buying silly power now? And now, like, why there's so many 30, 35 power scopes in the market, if most of what I've heard is people shooting 14 to 18?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's mainly because of that. And then also, so now where I do shoot that is at 100 yards. You know what I mean? Like when you're zeroing your scope, like the tighter you can get, the more accurate. Like, okay, am I shooting the left side of that dot, the right side of that dot? It's kind of like, how accurate can you be with a 4 MOA dot versus a 2 MOA dot, right? I mean, so the more magnification you can get, you can actually shoot it. Plus, they're cross tracking. I mean, guys who shoot, I think a lot of the guys who shoot like F-class adventurers, I don't know a lot about that particular discipline, but they're shooting higher power stuff. So maybe, you have cross-discipline scopes and that. And then it's just magnification range. Guys like, the Vortex 4.5 to, was that 30 or 28 or whatever that is? They're just doing the 8X erector or 7X erector or 6X erector or whatever that's going to be. And that's kind of where they set the bottom, where they set the top on it. I think they're all kind of about the same. Everybody's shooting that. Now, as far as what people shoot that actually shoot in the match, that kind of varies a lot. I think a lot of the higher top shooters tend to shoot kind of more where I'm shooting in that 16, 18 power range. I think a lot of the newer shooters tend to shoot in that like 12 to 15 power range. And that'll maybe piggyback on something else that we were talking about earlier. Like, what do you need to be able to do in your first match? You need to be able to pull up the scope and find targets. I see that a lot of times, guys, looking down range and, you see the white spot at the target you're supposed to do, and they put the gun up and the gun's pointed 30 degrees to the left. Like, hey man, you're not even close. You get that thing going down range. And that happens to do with, so guys want to back that magnification out so that the field of view is bigger. Oh, there's a target. And then they zoom back in. And as you get better and better, the guys are able to just throw the rifle up on the barricade, and then they look in the scope, and even at high magnification, now they're still looking at the target. So now they're faster rather than having to reach up, go back and forth. And they have that ability with the first focal plane scope where the details a little bit better between, like a 0.2 and a 0.3 hold or whatever it might be.
Okay. Now you mentioned Christmas tree or tree reticles earlier. So I've been, reviewing some different options in the optics classes, and it's interesting because I had never actually mounted a tree reticle before, but I've had plenty of like Milhash ones. And I thought I would like the tree a lot more than I did. I feel like it got a lot busier. And then as I was thinking about something else you said, is that really most of the time I feel like if I'm doing like elevation, I'm probably going to crank on the turret, unless I know there are stages where, hey, you can't dial. So holdover is the way to go. Kind of what's your perspective on that?
Well, so there's two things. There's really, I know guys, the guy Matt Trevay, he runs a Tremor 2 or Tremor 3 reticle, and he doesn't dial anything at all. Like, he holds over every single thing and uses the wind dots in there. But I think that he is definitely the, I don't say odd man out, he's a nice guy, but that's kind of the lower side of it. There's not many people doing that. My perspective is I initially, when I started getting in this game, I did what everybody else. I read this and read that. And especially being a 3-gunner, and shooting kind of like BDC reticles and that kind of stuff, and like a 1-to-6 power razor that I had, I thought like, well, I want a tree. I'm going to be up here. I'm going to be, because I'm thinking I'm going to hold over, right? If I go fast, because I'm thinking speed. I'm always thinking speed coming from USPSA and 3-gun. Like, man, I got to get this thing done, right? I got to get this done fast. I'm going to be holding over. And it's really not the case. So one of the things, as I started getting a little bit better, that again, one of the things you start picking up is trying to pick up, say, some of the mirage and some of the grass and those things moving in between shots. Like, okay, is the grass still leaning over the same way it was? Is it not? And what I found for me personally was that the trees that I was running, now I say all this, but my current scope is a tree reticle. So, but it's kind of the only reticle they offered in the scope. It's a great scope. But, I had moved away from that because I found that the scopes I was running, that tree really blocked a lot of the lower part. And I found myself getting on the reticle and then kind of having to depress the muzzle a little bit to get the target in the upper field of the reticle, or the upper field of the scope above the reticle, to kind of see all of that stuff with mirage and grass and wind and all that stuff, which obviously a lot of that stuff tends to be below the target, right? Not above the target. Okay. So I had gone away. And the other part of it is you're only going to need, like you mentioned a couple of things there about like, well, I'm mostly going to dial unless I have to, the stage dictates that I cannot dial, that I have to hold. And that's true. But even without a tree reticle, it depends on what kind of wind you have that you need to hold. Because if the wind isn't that significant, then you're not really going to be off that center line, right? So if I've got to hold, so you're going to dial your first target, let's say. So you dialed up, whatever it is, 3 mils. And now you're going to hold 1 mil because your next target's 4 mils. Let's just use random numbers. So you're at the main crosshair for the first target. So now you've got wind along left and right because you're on the main crosshair, right? You engage that target. Well, if you're only holding, left edge or just off left edge, you're really not measuring, right? So we normally talk about wind in a couple 3 ways. Usually you're going to say something like, hey, I'm holding straight up, or, favoring left or favoring right, or left edge or right edge, or like just off the edge. So all of that is going to be relative to that vertical line in the middle of the scope, right? Otherwise, when you start picking up wind a little bit more, now you're going to start talking about, well, I'm holding, 1.2, and that's usually to center, like not to an edge. So if I told you, hey, the wind was 1.3 mils, you should instinctively know that I mean that 1.3 mil mark is to the center of the target, not to the left edge or the right edge, but to the center. So again, if you're in a wind situation where it's not that significant, even at 2 or 3 mils of elevation, I have enough kind of just looking at the target that I'm shooting at that I'm like, just a little left of center, left edge, just off the left edge. There's a fair amount of wind raging there, up to probably, a half mil or better. So let's just start talking about, 1,300 yard shots, which you're probably not going to have to hold over on because that's not the way they run the stage, and more than 5, 6, 7, 8 mile an hour wind, you're really not going to be that far off of the center that you need a tree. Does that make sense to what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
There?
Yeah. So it's almost exaggerated how much you actually have to move left and right. Right.
And so the only time I've had it happen one time, and I was shooting as a match, like I told you, Matt runs that setup where he set up a stage because he was a match director for his great match, War Rifles match last year, where he set up like a target that was at like 300 and a target that was at 800. So there was a significant, and you had to shoot one and then the other and then move, one and then the other, move one and the other. And he set up like, I think it was 5 or 6 positions. So it was like 10 or 12 shots. So it was a lot of movement in out and back. And we happened to be up on a day that was running like 10 miles an hour wind. So that was I think one of the few times in several years of shooting that I had to kind of like shoot one. And then I was, what did I call, like in Never Never Land, because I was running a scope without a tree, where I'm just kind of like, I think it's right about here. And, I think that's enough wind, kind of looking through it. So it's kind of rare in my opinion that happens, that I really am looking at, that reticle where I'm counting, all right, this is over here. Because just the way I shoot, I end up dialing enough where it doesn't really matter.
Last piece in here, supporting gear. So in this conversation, you have mentioned Kestrel. You have mentioned a bag. Is there anything else you think someone should know before they show up to a match, or they should buy?
Obviously a bipod. It's like bipod rear bag, which is the bag. You got to show up with that, right? That's minimum. Just a sight in your rifle. You gotta have a rear bag, you gotta have a bipod. That's kind of the minimum thing. If you showed up to a match with a bipod, a rear bag, hopefully it's a rear bag like a Game Changer style rear bag. The old school, like little tiny sand socks, is not going to quite get it done for the rest of the match. And your ammo, you in a phone app that was Trude, you could do pretty well. You put all that stuff in a backpack and you walk around with your lunch and your water bottle. You got 85-90% of what you need. As you progress through the things that they're starting to do, the field is just getting so good. If you look at any of the standings, the point spreads between any of the places is so tight. You start looking at like 40th to 80th place in the nation is spread by like 4 points, 5 points. You know what I mean? It's over an entire year. You've hit 5 or 6 targets. There's a difference between 20, 30 slots. It's a huge, it's that competitive, tenths of points, they're going down to, I think like 3 decimal places or something crazy to get your point. It's that competitive. So when you start getting at that level, now having the ability, they're testing different skill sets at each thing. Like, can you run a lot of positions very quickly? Like, there'll be stuff at the finales and some of the harder matches where you're going to run like 10 or 12 different positions, one shot at each position move, one shot move, one shot move. So it's like, can you get set up that fast? You know what I mean? So that's a skill set. It's the wind reading, let's do a lot of guys consider the troop line, like you laying up on the tower and you're going to shoot, 800, 900, all the way out to 1200, whatever you're going to do. So like, how well did you read the wind? You see your misses, see what's going on and go out there. There's some of the speed stuff. And then there's some of the other things like shooting off of a tripod for tripod rear support. And there's, low ports and high ports and different things like that. So there's all these most of the time, I know when I first started shooting some of this stuff, I was lucky enough to be friends and still friends with Matt Brousseau, one of the best shooters who's been out there. He's won like 3 years in a row. He won the series. And so, I was actually fortunate enough to have known him prior and shot like as his amateur in the gap grind when we did that. And one of the things he kind of said to me when we first did it was like, dude, a barricade is a barricade is a barricade. It's either like low, medium, or high. And for 98% of the situations, that's true. Now they're starting to get into a couple other little things where it's like, hey, they're trying to test, do you have this skill set? Do you have that skill set? And if you're going to start playing at that level, then you're going to start needing to be good with a tripod, as rear support. And you're going to start needing to be good with a thin bag. You're going to need to start being good with this and that and speed and everything else. But for the guy showing up that, is just hoping to hit a bunch of targets out there and do really well and, doesn't have the time and the experience to invest in all that stuff just yet. Yeah. Bipod, rear bag, ammo that works, and, a phone app, and you're probably going to do pretty well. And frankly, like, I'll be there. You can use my tripod. That's just kind of the way it is. Let me show you how to try to use it now. There's the old saying, especially when there's no good ideas at a match. There's no like, hey man, I've never done this before. I think this is a fantastic idea on how to shoot this. Like, no, dude, that is not a good idea at all. That's a horrible idea.
So,
but as a new shooter, that is a good idea. You know what I mean? Like people do think about that, and I do encourage a new shooter to show up to a one-day match, and they need to use that to learn. Everybody wants to be competitive, and we all are. You didn't show up to the match to not be competitive, right? Like, that's why you signed up and did it. At some point, you're competitive with somebody, even if it's just your group of friends or with yourself. You want to do better, and so sometimes that does limit people because they're like, "Man, I've never shot like that before. I haven't done that." And I'm like, "Man, but is this a facility? Like, do you train in a facility like this all the time?" Like, no. I'm like, well, this is your opportunity to give it a try. Like, watch how, this guy right here, he's winning the match. Watch how he's shooting. Yeah, but I don't know how to shoot like that. Well, this is your opportunity to give that a try, right? So don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to ask those guys like, hey, how did you do that? And go up and fail miserably at it. I mean, I did. When I first did, I remember shooting with, a good friend of mine, his name is Kevin Shepard, fantastic shooter. And Kevin has the ability to go up with 15 different bags and build a position that's super stable with all these bags and do it unbelievably fast. And since, again, it was a guy that I was hanging out with, I was like, well, that's how you shoot this stuff. And I can't do that at all. I was horrible at it. I go through all these bags and I'm going to build this position. Like, no, you're not going to build that position. You're not at all. So, sometimes you try something and you realize that's not the way I could shoot, and then, like I said, then I start shooting with Matt, and Matt shoots like me. He shoots, one bag. All right, here we go. Let's go with this. And that's how I shoot better.
Okay.
But everybody's got their own little techniques. So don't be afraid to try those techniques and realize that some of them you're going to fail miserably, and some of them you're going to be like, oh my God, that was awesome. And the light will, click.
Okay. So, one more question on this one.
Sure.
Is it practical to bring a spotting scope or binoculars to something like this?
Absolutely. Mandatory. Well, not mandatory, but yes, that is something. And you will notice, I forget where I read it, but it was somebody was mentioning, it was a newer shooter showing up, and it was like, man, I never realized how much time, the top shooters spend looking through binoculars, most guys use binoculars. Spotting scopes are very challenging on your eyes to kind of look through that one thing. I recommend a nice 12 or 15 power binocular. You be able to see everything you need to, and just sit there and look through there.
Okay, good to know. All right, one more question for me. Actually, two questions, then I'm done. I know we're running out of time here. So, going back to earlier in the conversation, do you have any suggestions for people who don't have a long range to practice at? Like maybe they've got 100 yards. 25 yards.
Yeah. There are target sets out there, like little dots and little things like that. You can work on speed and barricades and whatnot. It does become a challenge. There's only so much you can do at 200 to 300 yards. Now, that being said, I know the guys at the AMU, they regularly practice at 200 and 300 yards. It's very challenging for them at Benning to get out on 1,000, 1,200 yard ranges. You'd think with the AMU they'd have all that stuff, but they really don't. So it's not impossible to do it, but it does become a challenge because the a lot of this stuff, like we talked about earlier, the rifles are extremely accurate, right? I mean, and that's what I was saying too, is that these stages most of the time would not be that much of a challenge given a lot of time where you can sit and really see what the wind's doing and all that stuff. But there's only so much wind practice you're going to get shooting and how that bullet drops and what's going on and what the little movements that you're going to have in your rifle, how much of an angular difference that really makes down range, right? It's only going to move the bullet so far at 100 or 200 yards. Okay. But it, how much it moves at range. But that being said, the things you can do, I mean, frankly, in your backyard, if you have the ability, you can put a little piece of steel or a little whatever, build a little barricade. That getting onto the barricade and getting done quickly and getting on there is very important. I know, like, quick story, like one of my first couple of matches, I got up there and like a lot of guys, are just not getting through the stage, right? Like not able to build the position quickly and not be stable in my position. So of course I get home and I go out to Lowe's and I buy a bunch of 2x4s and I make this little barricade in my backyard. And I get on there and I figure out the position that I need to be in. I'm rock steady. I'm like, I'm going to go to this next match and I'm going to crush some souls. Like, here it comes, right? And I get out there and the same thing happens. I get up on these stages and I can't get the rifle on target and wait till I get steady on the target, but then I got to move, right? And what I had practiced was I had put my rifle up on that position and then I sat there and I racked that bolt 100 times and I was so steady, but the trick of that is I had, maybe I wasn't as steady on that first shot, but certainly by that number 20 through 40 of my dry fires, I was super, super steady because I'd figured out that position. But I hadn't figured out at that point how to get into that position very quickly. So then after that match, what I started doing in my training sessions was I would only go up and I would never, unless I was really just Ricky or trying to, like, is this a little better than that? But I always would only shoot 1 or 2 shots from any one position, then I would move. Because the thing is, what's going to happen is you're not going to shoot a lot in any one position. You're going to shoot a lot of positions, only a couple of shots. So you have to move in that type of a stage. So that is one thing you can practice at a range, as close as 20 yards in your backyard, is getting into that position. How does that rifle need to set? How do I need to hold the bag? How do I need to move that bag from this position to this next position, get behind the rifle and be steady quickly? And that's what those guys are doing who are at the top are doing very fast. And that can be done literally in your living room.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So one last question, Mike.
Sure.
And it's one I asked to everybody. What is something that you wish people would stop doing immediately?
Well, and I'm guilty of it too. After a match, if I'd only hit 2 more shots, I would have won. And we're all guilty of doing that. So it's as much as that I need to stop it, because guess what? Everybody's thinking the same thing. If everybody had only hit 2 with this shot, or if I hadn't tanked that one stage, we all would have won. So it's kind of like one of those, like you're the only one that had a bad stage, that feeling. And I got to stop blaming, if I'd only done this, I would have been better. Like, no, like that's why everybody where you're shooting or whatever is at that position, because they shot that stuff. So, take accountability for what you've done and where you finished. Not that you just tanked that one stage. We all tanked the one stage and go, if I hadn't done that, I would have been here and on that. So I've been really trying myself. I'm as guilty or more guilty than anybody of, driving home and, if I hadn't have done that, I really shoot better than I did. No, you didn't. You didn't shoot better than you did. You shot right where you did, because the same guy that finished next to you, he did the same thing. And the guys who didn't did it. And the guys who did worse are below you. That's how it happened.
All right, Mike, this has been a pleasure talking to you. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, is there social media platforms or some way like you want to put your name out there if someone wants to follow you?
Yeah, the Alpha Munitions PRS shooting team on Facebook. There's a little page we have there. You can kind of, I don't say follow us there, but follow us there, like that page, and I usually give updates on what's going on with the matches and whatnot. Certainly if you tag into any of that stuff, certainly if you have any brass questions, ammunition questions, we're here to answer any of those questions for you guys. So anything you do to help out, like I said, just shooting a match, we'll be around.
All right, Mike. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
All right. Take care.
All right, let's talk about some key takeaways from this interview with Mike Keenan. What did you think? I learned a lot out of this one. I hope you did too. Be sure to come by the website, everydaymarksman.co, and drop a comment on this episode and let Mike and myself know what you took away. Now, for me, I think there was 3 really big pieces of information here I want to walk away from. Number 1 is that you really should not be concerned with not having the right gear. Now, Mike pointed out early on in the episode that if you show up with a rifle that is correctly zeroed, and you know your zero, and you know your data, you know your ballistic data, you know how to find your drops, people will help you with the rest. If you don't have the right bag, you don't have a spotting scope, you don't have binoculars, you don't have the bipod, people will go out of their way to help you out if you just show that you're interested and you want to put in that little bit of extra effort. So there's a huge element of sportsmanship there. And Mike pointed out that PRS has some of the best sportsmanship he's ever come across within any of the shooting sports that he's competed in. And he's competed in a lot of them. So I think that was a really, really big one. And I want to make sure people know that it's more important for you just to get out there and go do it than to worry about having the perfect thing to start off with. Now, with that, he did say that this is not a poor man's sport. So it's not that you need to go have a $6,000 rifle, but you need to have something that's going to enable you to have fun. So showing up with a $400 to $500 Walmart special and the cheapest glass you can fit on it, probably not going to work out for you because it's not going to track well. It's not going to have very accurate measurements in the reticle, and it's just going to hold you back more, and you may walk away more frustrated than happy. All right, now let's talk about some hardware takeaways I got out of this. I think Mike had a really good discussion about picking the right cartridge. Now, I'm a 308 nerd. I'm fully planning on walking into this shooting a 308 for a good long time. But that said, if you are starting from scratch, I thought Mike's advice about picking was really good advice. Now, here let's play it back.
So first and foremost, you need to ask yourself, are you going to reload or not? If you're not, you now have limited yourself to a couple of cartridges in my mind. And on those, I would probably go with the 6 Creedmoor again, just because that's the 6mm is just kind of where it's at in PRS.
So there you have it. If you are planning on using factory loaded ammo, which I will probably do for quite a long time, then pick something that's a 6.5 Creedmoor or 6mm Creedmoor, because there's already really good match loaded ammo out there for that cartridge. If you're planning on going with reloading your own ammo, as a lot of the pros do, then you should do what suits your fancy. All right. Now, with the cartridge discussion, I think there was another element there which had to do with velocity versus the BC or ballistic coefficient. Let's listen to that one.
One of the basic things we kind of did is from about 0 to 500-ish yards, speed tends to be a little bit more important than BC. And then from 500 or 600 to 1,000, BC tends to be a little bit more important than.
So from 0 to 500 yards, we're really much more concerned about how that bullet is retaining velocity. That's our flatter trajectory. But from 500 yards and beyond, now we're getting more concerned with that ballistic coefficient. I'm not saying you have to pick one or the other, because really we're looking at compromises all around. So it comes down to knowing your dope from both ends, both how it's going to do from speed as well as the BC, and having the right drops for you. I would argue it's probably more important to just really know your ballistic data. And Mike gave the example of people who actually have zones of ballistic data, because as the bullet slows down, the BC will decrease and it gets less efficient. So they have different zones. From 0 to 600 yards is zone 1, from 600 plus it's zone 2, and they have slightly different true ballistic data. So interesting way to handle it. Now, something else that came up in this interview I thought was a good takeaway was just some of the ancillary gear. And the number one thing he recommended was a good bag. He was a big advocate of the Armageddon Gear Game Changer, which I know from reading precision rifle blogs that is the most popular bag in this series, as well as the Weebad Fortune Cookie. I'll leave links to those both in the show notes, as well as one I'm interested in, which is I'll reveal in the future because I want to give it a test run myself. Okay, I think that's probably good for the major takeaways. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and make sure you come by the website. Now, here is one key call to action I have for you guys. The Everyday Marksman is fully funded by our listeners and our readers. So, which means we don't accept sponsorships or anything like that. We don't take money to sell you ads. What I do rely on is either you guys clicking on links I provide for affiliate sales, or you directly contribute to the site. So I am asking, if you really enjoy what you're getting from the Everyday Marksman, go to everydaymarksman.co/support. And for the cost of a box of ammo, you can help me keep producing more interviews, more articles, more reviews, and all the great stuff that you guys are interested in knowing more about. All right, that is it for me today, guys. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I will catch you next time. This is Matt signing out.